He had just stepped out of his car, a calm evening, his own driveway, his own home. But within minutes, flashing lights swallowed the street. 3 police cars screeched in, neighbors rushed out, phones went live, and in seconds, the world was watching a scene fueled by assumption, fear, and prejudice. A black man, handcuffed on his own property, no one knowing the truth. Because the man they were restraining wasn't just any civilian, he was an FBI assistant director. And this is the true story of how one composed, strategic man exposed an entire police department without ever raising his voice. The sun had barely risen over Brookhaven, that gentle, quiet kind of morning where the world feels almost soft. Terrence Washington locked his front door, coffee in hand, briefcase at his side, ready to head to the FBI field office like he had for years. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't upset. Just another peaceful start in a town he trusted. But peace, he would soon learn, can shatter without warning. As Terrence reached his car, a patrol cruiser slowed in front of his driveway. Officer Sullivan, a man Terrence had never spoken to, but who now stared at him with the kind of suspicion that needs no words. The kind that sticks to your skin. "Let me see your ID," Sullivan barked before Terrence could even greet him. "For what reason, officer?" Terrence asked, steady, respectful. But Sullivan didn't want answers. He wanted control. And suspicion turned to hostility. Hostility turned to outright racism. Within seconds, Terrence found himself surrounded, questioned, doubted for existing in front of his own home. Humiliation pressed on him like weight. Yet he stayed calm, completely calm, because he knew something Sullivan didn't. Terrence had spent a lifetime learning when to speak and when to let the truth reveal itself. Across the street, Mrs. Carter, a retired schoolteacher with trembling hands, quietly lifted her phone. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want attention. She just knew what she was seeing was wrong. She tapped go live. At first, only 6 people joined. Then 20. Then 100. The viewer count rolled upward like a fuse being lit, and the world began to watch a story unfold that no one was prepared for. In Brookhaven, on a quiet morning, injustice had just found its witness, and Terrence Washington stood in the center of a storm he never caused. The morning air had shifted. What began as a quiet, harmless moment outside Terrence Washington's home was now thick with tension, the kind that feels alive, crawling under the skin, heavy in the throat. Officer Sullivan stood inches away from him, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed, not in professionalism, but in certainty. Certainty that Terrence didn't belong in the kind of neighborhood where lawns were trimmed and mailboxes were polished. Certainty that a black man in a suit was still suspicious, still a threat, still out of place. "Put your hands where I can see them," Sullivan ordered sharply. Terrence lifted his hands slowly, controlled, measured. "I'm on my own property," he reminded, voice steady despite the burning humiliation rising in his chest. Sullivan moved anyway, grabbing Terrence's wrist with unnecessary force, twisting it just enough to send a sharp jolt through his arm. "ID. Wallet. Let's go. Don't make this difficult." Terrence gritted his teeth, but didn't resist. "It's in my jacket pocket. I'll reach slow." But Sullivan didn't wait. He shoved his hand into Terrence's jacket, rifling through his wallet like he was searching a criminal's hideout. Not the belongings of a federal official who outranked him by several lifetimes. He pulled out Terrence's ID, glanced at it, scoffed, and shook his head. "You expect me to believe this?" Sullivan said. "Assistant director? Of the FBI? Yeah, sure." His tone carried enough sarcasm to slice skin. Terrence couldn't do anything except stand there, silent, anchored only by years of discipline and the knowledge that reacting would only feed the monster in front of him. Across the street, neighbors were beginning to gather. Some whispered nervously, some filmed quietly, unsure what was happening, and some smirked with a satisfaction they didn't bother to hide that a man Terrence recognized. Mr. Bradshaw muttered loudly, "Well, about time the police showed up. I knew something was off with him." Another woman, clutching her robe closed, chimed in, "They always pretend they live here, always think they can fool people." Mrs. Carter, still live streaming, whispered a soft, horrified, "Oh Lord," as she watched racism unfold like a slow-motion accident, and the viewer count, It kept rising, 600, 900, 1200, 2000. Terrence glanced down, just slightly at his wrist. His Omega watch gleamed under the morning sun. The second hand ticked forward with a merciless rhythm, 10 minutes left, 10 minutes, until the weekly national security briefing, 10 minutes, until Director Jensen wouldn't notice Terrence. Missing, 10 minutes, until questions would explode. Terrence inhaled deeply. He knew what would happen when the FBI realized their assistant director wasn't answering. His phone buzzed. Incoming call. FBI Director Jensen. Terrence's heart tightened. That call could clear everything, instantly. But Sullivan stepped forward, snatched the phone from his pocket, and tossed it onto Terrence's car hood without even glancing at the caller ID. Jensen's call went unanswered. Seconds later, buzz, second call. Sullivan rolled his eyes. Popular today, aren't you? Third call, buzzing angrily against the metal. Terrence said quietly, "That call is important." Sullivan smirked. "Not to me." The call died. And with it, Terrence felt the countdown compress even tighter. The live stream hit 5,000 viewers. Comments flooded in. "This is unlawful. Why is he being searched on his own porch?" He said, "FBI, check his badge. This officer is enjoying it. Look at him." Sullivan didn't know the world was watching him. Not yet. Not fully. Backup finally arrived. Two cruisers screeching in, gravel crunching under their tires. Officers Ramirez and Cole stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters, eyes scanning Terrence like he had already been declared guilty of something unspoken. "What's the situation?" Ramirez asked. Sullivan puffed his chest like a man who finally had an audience. "Suspicious male. Claims he lives here. Claims he's FBI." He held up Terrence's credentials loosely. "Could be fake." Ramirez squinted at the badge. Cole shrugged. Neither stepped closer to actually verify it. Instead, Cole glanced at Terrence. "Sir, if you refuse to cooperate—" "I haven't refused anything," Terrence replied calmly. "Then stop resisting." "I'm not resisting." But it didn't matter in that moment. Truth had no weight. Only perception did. And Terrence, a decorated, respected federal leader, was being crushed under the perception of men who saw only the color of his skin. The viewer count hit 9,000. Misses. Carter whispered, "Lord help him." Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop recording. Her small act, one quiet woman on a quiet street, was turning into something unstoppable. Sullivan snapped open a pair of handcuffs, chrome. "Cold." "Waiting. Turn around," he said. Terrence exhaled slowly, closing his eyes for just a moment. He could overpower Sullivan in a second. He could reveal his identity and make one phone call that would bring half the federal government to Brookhaven within minutes. But he didn't, because sometimes the loudest justice comes from silence. He said only, "Officer Sullivan, don't speak," Sullivan barked. Terrence turned around anyway, hands behind his back, dignity intact though everything else was being stripped away. Sullivan grabbed his wrists and locked the cuffs tighter than necessary. The metal bit into Terrence's skin. Terrence leaned in slightly, just enough that Sullivan alone could hear him. "Officer," he whispered calmly, like a man stating the weather, "remember your badge number." Sullivan froze, just for a heartbeat. That a flicker of something passed across his face. Not fear, not respect, confusion, because men like Terrence didn't usually sound like that. Not when being handcuffed, not when being degraded, not when surrounded. The livestream hit 15,000 viewers. People around the world were watching a man remain composed while being humiliated. Watching a police officer spiral deeper into a mistake that would soon define his career. Watching racism play out in real time. Undeniable, unedited, and watching the countdown. Terrence glanced once more at his watch. 7 minutes left. Director Jensen would call again, or send agents, or worse, start mobilizing. Terrence's heart beat steadily, the way it did during hostage rescues, counterintelligence briefings, operations that require a man to be both strategist and soldier at the same time. But this moment, this wasn't a mission. This was personal. This was home. And as Sullivan tightened his grip on Terrence's arm, guiding him toward the cruiser, Terrence knew one truth with absolute clarity. The real story hadn't even started yet. The cuffs tightened around Terrence's wrists with every step Sullivan forced him to take. Neighbors stood frozen, the murmurs growing louder, the phones out, the live stream hitting 30,000 viewers. People around the world watched a man with the calm of a monk, enduring the humiliation of a criminal. Terrence's Omega watch ticked steadily. 0.4 minutes left. Director Jensen had already called 3 times. When the 4th call came, it buzzed so violently against the car hood that even Sullivan paused. He snatched the phone with irritation, swiped to answer, and pressed it to his ear like he was talking to a telemarketer. "This is Officer Sullivan of Brookhaven PD. "Who's this?" A beat. He smirked. "Oh, the FBI director, huh? Sure. And I'm the president." Terrence closed his eyes that a storm was coming. And Sullivan had no idea he'd just stepped in a lightning. On the other end of the line, the voice did not waver, did not shout, did not stutter. "Officer Sullivan," the woman said, calm and lethal, "put me on speaker." Sullivan rolled his eyes dramatically and pressed the speaker button, projecting her voice across the driveway. "Before you say another word," the woman continued, "identify yourself." Sullivan puffed his chest, proud as ever. "Officer Jonathan Sullivan." "Badge, stop." That single word cut sharper than a blade. The entire crowd went silent. Even the birds in the trees seemed to freeze. "This is Director Olivia Jensen, Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said slowly, each word delivered with precision. "And you are currently detaining one of my assistant directors." Sullivan blinked, once, twice. Then he laughed, actually laughed. "Lady, you've been watching too many movies," he chuckled. "This man? FBI? He's resisting and pretending to be." The line exploded with a shout so sharp it shook the air. "Officer Sullivan, you will remove those cuffs immediately." Her voice echoed across the street, through every phone recording, through the live stream broadcasting to tens of thousands. A hush fell. Neighbors shifted nervously. Even Ramirez and Cole exchanged alarmed glances. Sullivan's face drained of confidence. He pulled the phone away from his ear slightly, suddenly unsure of the ground he stood on. Then, a sound that changed everything. Engines. Low, powerful, synchronized engines. From the end of the street, 6 black SUVs turned the corner. Not speeding, just moving with cold, calculated authority. The kind that announces itself without sirens. A federal strike team. Doors opened before the vehicles even fully stopped. Agents stepped out in coordinated precision, black suits sharp, earpieces blinking, hands ready but disciplined. The neighborhood transformed in seconds. Whispers from bystanders filled the air. "Are those? That looks like the FBI. Oh my God." Mrs. Carter, still live, whispered, "Lord have mercy." As her stream hit 50,000 viewers, Sullivan stumbled backward, suddenly sweating. What is this?" he muttered from the center SUV. A woman stepped out. Director Olivia Jensen. Tall, commanding, a presence carved from steel. Her eyes burned with rage, the kind reserved for betrayal or injustice. Her coat swayed slightly in the breeze as she walked with unwavering certainty towards Sullivan. Every agent fell into position behind her. She stopped barely 3 feet away. "Officer Sullivan," she said coolly, "step away from my assistant director." Sullivan swallowed. His voice cracked. Hitchie said he didn't show. He looked, she cut him off again. "Uncuff him." But now. Her tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Sullivan's hand shook as he reached for the cuffs. For the first time since the incident began, Terrence felt the metal loosen. His wrists stung where the steel had dug in, but he remained calm, dignified. The cuffs clicked open. Terrence rubbed his wrists gently, then turned to face the woman who had just changed the course of the morning. Director Jensen placed a steady hand on his shoulder, not out of pity, but respect. "Terrence," she said, voice softening. "Are you all right?" He nodded once. "I'm fine, Director. You shouldn't have had to endure this." Her jaw clenched. "Not after everything you've given this agency." The officers around Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. Cole looked pale. Ramirez looked like he wanted to disappear altogether. Sullivan tried one last breath. There must be some confusion. He didn't identify himself properly, and Terrence finally spoke. Not with anger, not with vengeance. Only truth, Officer Sullivan, he said, meeting the man's eyes with a calm deeper than the ocean. For 23 years, I have served this nation. The crowd leaned in. Even the agents remained still. I've spent my career in the FBI Civil Rights Division, Terrence continued, investigating misconduct, training departments, protecting communities from exactly what happened here today. Sullivan's mouth hung open. Terrence stepped closer, not threatening, simply present. I am the assistant director of the Civil Rights Division, he said quietly. I write the protocols your department claims to follow. The street erupted into murmurs. Phones everywhere were recording, capturing the face of a man who had just destroyed his own career in front of the entire country. Director Jensen spoke next. Officer Sullivan, she said with deadly precision, you detained a federal official without cause. You denied him access to identify himself. You obstructed communication with a federal office. You escalated force where none was warranted. Terrence added gently, and you never once asked why a black man couldn't live in this home. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jensen's eyes were fire. This incident is now under federal investigation. Effective immediately. You and your department will comply. Sullivan stammered. Am I under arrest? Terrence didn't answer. He didn't need to. Director Jensen snapped her fingers once. Two agents stepped forward, walking past Terrence and stopping directly behind Sullivan. The man who had smirked moments ago now trembled. The live stream hit 100,000 viewers. Jensen turned to Terrence. Let's get you out of here, she said, but Terrence didn't move yet. Instead, he looked at the neighborhood, at the faces that judged him, the faces that defended him, the faces that watched silently. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. This morning was supposed to be ordinary. Then he looked straight into Sullivan's eyes. But now, it's a case. The neighborhood hadn't recovered from the shock of the black SUVs when the next wave arrived. Federal agents moved with purpose. Not chaotic, not frantic, but with the practiced discipline of a system that had already rehearsed moments like this 100 times. Within minutes, Brookhaven's peaceful suburb transformed into the nerve center of an unfolding federal operation. Residents watched from behind curtains. Phones streamed from porches and sidewalks. Millions were now witnessing history in real time. This wasn't a traffic stop anymore. IT was Operation Mirror, a rapid response federal protocol designed to expose systemic bias, misconduct, and procedural failures. Terrence had helped write it years earlier. Now he was the reason it had been activated. The federal switch gets FLG Director Jensen stood at the center of the street like a general on a battlefield. Her voice carried through the radios of her agents. Operation Mirror is active. Deploy audit teams. Begin data extraction from Brookhaven PD. Secure the perimeter. Agents split into groups, each moving with mechanical precision. 3 SUVs peeled off toward the police department itself, less than 4 minutes away. Their mission: seize body cam archives, pull digital logs, lock down dispatch audio, and preserve every second of documentation. Terrence watched all of this silently, almost distantly. He had triggered this system before on departments in Louisiana, Georgia, and Ohio, but never imagined he would be the victim whose case set it in motion. Jensen approached him. Terrence, you don't have to stay for all of this, she said gently. But Terrence shook his head. No, he replied. Today, I need to see it. And so he stood, hands still stiff from the cuffs, dignity unbroken, as federal machinery began dissecting one police department's entire history, the past they tried to do, or why the audit was fast, terrifyingly fast. Within 20 minutes, the first alerts came in through agency tablets. Case number 1187, dismissed without cause. Officer Sullivan. Case number 1219, body cam deactivated. Officer Sullivan. Case number 1334, excessive force complaint never reviewed. Case number 1402, evidence of race-based stops from dispatch. Logs at IT didn't stop. Every few seconds, another file flashed red. A pattern, a system, a legacy of our OT. In just the first sweep, 47 past bias-related cases were flagged, all within the last 6 years. Nearly half of them had Sullivan's name on them. The live stream audience exploded. People around the world were commenting, he's done this before? How? Is this officer still employed? 47 cases. Brookhaven PD is finished. Mrs. Carter sobbed softly on camera. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. I just didn't know how deep it went. The police department gets frozen as agents move through the Brookhaven station. The officers inside had no idea what to do. Some tried to defend themselves, some tried to hide. Some simply sat at their desks, staring at their screens as years of negligence illuminated themselves in red ink. Federal auditors walked through hallways, opening doors, gathering evidence. Their shoulders bore the insignia of the Civil Rights Division, the very department Terrence helped lead. Hours of dispatch audio, body cam footage, arrest logs, complaint records, officer performance reviews. Everything was being copied, encrypted, sealed. Brookhaven PD was no longer in control. The IT belonged to the federal government now. Sullivan's career gets dissected back in neighborhood. Sullivan sat on the curb, not handcuffed, not arrested, but held in a bubble of silence and humiliation. He kept muttering to himself, I'm not racist. I'm not. I didn't, but the evidence scrolled publicly across tablets and screens everywhere. Terrence didn't look at him. Not why you. An agent approached Jensen and handed her a secure tablet. Director, we have Sullivan's full history. She scanned the screen. Point 17 citizen complaints. Point 12 use of force reports. Point 7 internal reprimands. Point 0 suspensions. Point 0 formal investigations. And then the most damning part. He had targeted black drivers at a rate 4.8 times higher than white drivers. Jensen exhaled through her teeth, a sound like steel bending under pressure. She turned to Sullivan. Officer Sullivan, she said, every corner of your career is unraveling. The pattern is unmistakable. The crowd around them was silent. Sullivan opened his mouth to speak, but Terrence finally stepped forward, and even the wind seemed to pause. Terrence speaks. And the nation didn't raise his voice. He didn't tremble. He didn't lash out. He simply stood, tall, calm, and heartbreakingly composed, and said, I bought a house. I stood in my driveway. Everything else was your choice. The words dropped like lead. People gasped. Some cried openly. Millions watching online felt chills ripple through them. IT wasn't anger. IT wasn't revenge. IT was truth. Sullivan's face collapsed into something between regret and disbelief. He wanted to protest, to defend himself, to spin some narrative. But Terrence's words left no space for lies. For the first time that morning, Sullivan understood the magnitude of what he had done. Federal impact hits Brookhaven as the evidence mounted. A federal budget representative joined via secure call. Jensen held the tablet outward so all officers could hear. Due to the severity of misconduct discovered, the voice stated, Brookhaven PD now faces immediate state-level funding review and the possibility of full federal takeover. Officers stared in horror. A federal takeover meant loss of local control, mandatory restructuring, multi-year oversight, forced retraining, possible replacement of leadership. Public reports every quarter, no freedom to bury anything ever again. The chief of police, a man who had remained silent for far too long, finally arrived on scene. He attempted to shake Terrence's hand. Terrence didn't offer his. The chief cleared his throat. This is all a misunderstanding. Brookhaven PD has always operated with integrity. Jensen cut him off. Your records say otherwise. The chief swallowed hard. This will ruin us. Terrence replied softly. No. Ignoring the truth ruined you long before today. The contract that changes everything be noon. The federal analysis was complete. The results? Brookhaven PD had failed nearly every civil rights metric in the federal evaluation system. A document was drafted on the spot, a thick, multi-page oversight agreement requiring a 5-year federal supervision, contract mandatory, implicit bias, training, annual compliance, audits, civilian review, board full transparency of all disciplinary actions, quarterly performance metrics published on Linean Independent Monitor. Assigned to the Department of Motion of key leadership positions, mandatory body cams for every officer, random federal inspections at any time. Director Jensen handed the contract to the chief. Sign it, she said. The chief looked at Terrence. Does this satisfy you? Terrence met his eyes with quiet gravity. This isn't about satisfying me, he said. This is about preventing the next Terrence Washington, the next man who buys a home and ends up handcuffed in his driveway. The chief's hands trembled as he signed. Brookhaven PD was now under federal control. The crowd around Terrence broke into scattered applause. Mrs. Carter sobbed in her phone. Thank God someone finally stopped them. Terrence took a long breath. The first free breath of the day. Operation Mirror completes. IT agents began packing equipment, sealing evidence, finalizing logs. The SUVs lined up once more. Director Jensen looked at Terrence. We'll finish the paperwork at the office, she said. But this moment, it's going to reshape training manuals across the country. Terrence glanced around at the neighbors, some ashamed, some relieved, some still confused. It should, he replied. Let today be a mirror. He didn't look at Sullivan again, that he didn't need to. The entire country was already looking at him. 6 months later, Brookhaven didn't look like the same town. The lawns were the same. The houses were the same. The quiet mornings and soft sunsets were the same. But the air, the culture, the way people looked at one another, completely transformed. Federal oversight had done what no one expected. It had rebuilt a police department from the inside out. Officers walked with accountability. Procedures were followed like scripture. And the numbers told the story better than any speech could. Bias-related. Incidents had dropped by 78%. That a community once cracked by distrust was slowly learning how to breathe again. The unlikely transformation of Sullivan, most shocking of all, was the transformation of Jonathan Sullivan. The man who had once stood in Terrence's driveway with arrogance and prejudice now spent his evenings coaching basketball for kids in predominantly black neighborhoods. The same kids he once profiled, he now protected. That he apologized publicly, not with a politician's polish, but with a man's trembling honesty. I can't undo what I did, he said at a community meeting, hands shaking. But I can change who I am from this day forward. People didn't forgive him overnight. They didn't have to. But they saw effort, consistency, growth, and maybe, for the first time in his life, Sullivan understood the weight of the badge he carried for so many years. Terrence rises to a national roller for Terrence Washington. Everything changed too. Not in fame, but in responsibility. His calm strength on that driveway. His refusal to respond with anger. His ability to let truth speak louder than rage. It didn't just reach the nation. It reshaped federal policy. In recognition of his leadership and the national impact of Operation Mirror, Terrence was promoted to lead the newly formed National Bias Prevention and Accountability Unit, the first of its kind in FBI history. His mandate was simple but enormous. Reform police culture, nationwide train departments, and bias detection prevent the next Brookhaven. And Terrence accepted it with the same quiet resolve he carried that morning in his driveway. Mrs. Carter, an unexpected issue across the country. One name began appearing beside Terrence's in articles, interviews, and documentaries. Mrs. Lois Carter, her trembling hands and quiet courage. Her decision to live stream what she saw became a national symbol of civilian courage. Universities invited her to speak. Civil rights groups honored her. Churches celebrated her as the woman who pressed record. In every interview, she said the same line, "I'm no hero. I just couldn't stay silent." But everyone knew the truth. Without her live stream, none of this would exist. That the nation, full of U.S. Congress, pressured by millions of voices, finally acted. Inspired directly by Terrence's case, they passed the Police Accountability and Transparency Act, requiring nationwide mandatory body cam usage, annual civil rights audits, data tracking of bias patterns, federal review for misconduct-heavy departments. A new era of policing had begun. Not perfect, not finished, but finally moving forward. The message. That changed why Terrence rarely talked about that morning anymore. Not because it hurt, but because it wasn't his story alone anymore. IT had become a mirror for America. A national conference filled with officers, activists, students, and leaders. Terrence delivered the message that defined everything. Don't react with anger. Respond with evidence. Anger burns a moment. Evidence changes a system. The audience rose to their feet. And in that moment, 6 months after being handcuffed in his own driveway, Terrence Washington wasn't just a victim or a federal official. He was the quiet force that changed a nation. In the end, Terrence Washington didn't become a national figure because he shouted, fought, or retaliated. He became a symbol because he chose discipline over rage, truth over pride, and evidence over fear. One morning in a quiet driveway exposed what thousands have been trying to prove for years. That justice doesn't always require a louder voice. Sometimes it only needs a wiser one. Brookhaven changed. America changed, and millions who watched that live stream learned something unforgettable. Dignity is a form of courage, and courage, when held with patience, can shake systems. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories that remind us what humanity, at its best, looks like.